Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to ask you just to pause your conversations, as fun as they may be, because now we're coming into really the bit we're all here for. We're going to have some tips on how to run. But first, my name is Chris, and I'm part of Woodlands Church, but I'm also part of the team delivering love running, I suppose, and helping you along the way. But I'm looking out to the audience, and I'm seeing just an array of elite athletes. And I'm wondering, why am I here? What's the point in me delivering all these tips when you're probably already so far ahead? But hey, we've got 18 minutes to kill, so let's do it anyway. I'm really happy to be here, and hopefully I can give you some tips. But the thing is, I did this 2 years ago, but before that there were a couple from the church who did this bit, who are actually real runners. And to me, I've never actually felt like a real runner. I wasn't born an athlete. I wasn't sort of made to be an athlete. For one thing, when I used to go swimming as a child in school, I used to feign asthma attacks just to get out. I mean, that's a terrible thing, really. But swimming coach, sorry about that if you're watching. You're not, so there you go. I've also got a diagnosed issue with my body. I've got an overactive bladder, which definitely hampers me as an athlete. And recently, just as recently as last year, I was on holiday, and my friend described me as the most disproportionate and most upper body heavy person he'd ever met. This was as he was trying to fish me out of a swimming pool. Why he was doing that, I don't know. So look, here's the thing I'm admitting to you straight off. I'm not an athlete, but one thing I do have in spades, one thing I have a lot of, which has helped me sort of go to the place that I've been to in terms of the running world, is pure, unadulterated, ridiculous levels of delusion, essentially. So this is the way I feel about myself. If we go to the next slide, this is how I wake up every morning. That's the vision of myself that I wake up with. And for me, I feel like, yes, I can do this. If I'm going out on a run, if I'm going out on my bike, that's the vision, not for where I want to be, that's the vision of who I am now. My wife doesn't agree with me, but we're getting closer and closer, I think. This is my first point. When it comes to running well, wherever you are, whether you've never put on the running shoes before or whether you've done it 100 times, it starts up here in the mind. It starts with how you feel and what you think about yourself. So my first tip, if we go to the next slide, is this. And this is something to remember. Go hard, but don't be hard on yourself. Okay, next slide. I just want to tell you about some of my training for the London Marathon. Funnily enough, as I walked in, somebody said to me, "Oh, where did you buy that T-shirt?" And I said, "No, I actually did do the marathon." And they thought, "No, surely not." But yes, I did do a marathon. And one thing that I did, obviously in preparation for the marathon, was did a lot of training. But you know, it's not always easy. There'll be some days when you'll go out running where you think, this is a doddle. But then there'll be other days when you think, this is really tough. And I just want to recount one training session where I managed to fall over twice. But not only that, I was running along happily in my white vest. And there, I just came across, it must have been a pterodactyl. It was massive. That was, well, you can see from the picture, an absolute mess. And for me, that's a picture of how tough things can be. But do you know what? Never stop believing that you can do great things. That's my first piece of advice. You're not going to go anywhere unless you believe that you can do it. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to push yourself too far. Set yourself a decent goal. But do you know what? You can do it. That's my first tip. But the second thing, I suppose, in terms of being more realistic is that sense of creating a goal. So if we go to the next slide, finding your 5%. So I don't know whether any of you are interested in cycling at all, but for any of you who have kept up with it the last few years, you'll know that British cycling has sort of absolutely exploded. You know, we've had 2 Tour de France winners, we've won multiple gold medals at Olympics and all of that sort of stuff. And one thing the head of British cycling said is they just looked at every area of training and they looked for that 1%. Well, I'm going above and beyond British cycling, and I'm saying that you can find that 5%. And what I mean is, if you've got a sense of a time in mind, or maybe you don't have even a time in mind, what's that 5% that you can just change the notches on to set that, just that little sense of going that further ahead? So it might be that you said, you know, I want to run this thing in an hour and just over an hour. Just change that to just under an hour. Now, it doesn't matter if you still do it in over an hour, but that sense of target could be absolutely massive. And hopefully the tips to come will help you sort of tip the balance in terms of that 5%. But for me, the 2 things I learned from the last Love Running was this, in terms of getting my 5%, because I personally want to get a time. Number 1, don't fall over on race day. I did that. It doesn't improve your chance of beating that 5% goal. And number 2, don't start at the back of your particular queue. Get there on time. If you want to sort of get ahead of everybody else, start at the front. So those are 2 things that I'm going to be doing this year. Not falling over being really the key one. You don't want to be visiting the St. John's ambulance after you've done the 10K. It's not great. A lot of it is in the head. I really do believe that. I've got no professional advice to give you in that respect. But for me, my experience of running is you have to believe that you can do it, and you have to set yourself a realistic but decent goal in order to get yourself to the next stage. So that's what I think anyway. But clearly, obviously, when you're setting yourself those goals, eating is absolutely vital. Joe Wicks, who you may have seen online, he does all of that high-intensity training stuff that I'm going to come on to in a moment, said this, which I think is great. You can't out-train a bad diet. I've tried it for many, many years, all of my life, effectively, and it doesn't work. I told my wife I'd have a six-pack before we got married. She didn't find it funny when I bought a six-pack of Fosters to our honeymoon. Look, it doesn't work. You can't expect to go further if you eat poorly. That's just the way it is, and I've found that out, unfortunately. So I've just got a couple of tips. I'll tell you one thing though. You may not believe this, but I did actually used to have a body once similar to Philip Giannardi. But actually, the good news is I did start to eat right, and now I'm in the shape I'm in. So happy days. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, so a runner's diet. Here's just some interesting things I learned. Ultimately, I imagine none of us are sort of looking to run the 10K in below 27 minutes and sort of do it in world record time. So the thing is, the pressure's not on us hugely. We don't have to be going around the shops looking at everything we buy and sort of calorie content, fat, carbohydrates, sugars, all of that stuff. I'm not suggesting that. I'm just suggesting there are perhaps a few things that we can all change. And here's just a few things that I learned, which I thought were really interesting. If we go to the next slide. I want to focus on the Kenyans. Okay, we all know that when you watch marathons, when you watch elite athletes, a lot of them come from countries like Kenya. But here's 2 incredible facts. 40% of distance runners between 1987 and 1997, I imagine it hasn't changed much, who won all middle to long distance elite races were from Kenya. Isn't that nuts? Half of those to complete the 10K, half of anyone to complete the 10K in less than 27 minutes are from Kenya. So I'm just pointing out, we can't change where we're from. I'm not suggesting that, but we can learn from the best. So interestingly enough, an ex-athlete and a nutritionist did some studies. They went over to Kenya and followed 10 young elite Kenyan athletes who were all about the same size. They were all sort of 20, 21, 22, old to be that young again, but we can't do anything about that either. Next slide. What they learned was fascinating, or I found it fascinating anyway. 76% of all of their calorie intake was from carbohydrates. 76%. They just love their potatoes. They just absolutely smashed it. And such a small amount came from protein and fat. Next slide. Here's the thing that I see from TV. No carbs before marbs, okay? Now, if you want to get in absolute, beach body ready state, maybe that's the thing for you. But if you want to sort of improve your sense of energy, if you want to push yourself that extra amount, then good carbohydrates are the thing for you. So now I'm not talking about pastries, I'm not talking about pizza, I'm not talking about cheese sandwiches, I'm talking about brown rice, I'm talking about good vegetables. Quinoa, we're in Bristol, we can say we eat quinoa, it's a hipster thing to do. We're allowed to do that, it's fine. Get good carbohydrates into your body. Now, scientists and nutritionists suggest that sort of a normal everyday runner should probably have between about 60 and 65% of their overall calorie intake as carbohydrates. So we're not going fully Kenyan. I'm just suggesting that think about your diet. Think about what you have mainly for your breakfast, your main meals, and that sort of thing. Are you getting enough vegetables? Are you getting enough good carbohydrates? The sort of carbohydrates are going to burn energy slower, that are going to release energy slower, that are going to enable you to go from doing a couple of kilometers to 5 kilometers to 10 kilometers. It's really simple. I'm not suggesting you should go out and look at everything that you buy. It's just thinking, how can I cut down those sugars that will give you an amazing boost for a moment, and then later on are going to make you crash. So I'm in no way telling you what to do, because I'm struggling to do that myself. I love food, but it's definitely something that I know I need to do. Next slide. It's a similar thing really, but just a suggestion as well. I was a vegan. Now I'm sort of a closet vegan because I'm not really a vegan anymore. But interestingly as well, they found from this study that these elite Kenyan athletes only gained about 14% of their total calorie intake from meat products. I just thought that was really interesting. There's this common misconception that if you're going to do something beyond your normal amount, you should, eat as much meat as possible. That's not true. You can get plenty of great protein, obviously your carbohydrates, from plant-based products. Just something to think about. Next slide. Fuel for training. So I've talked, that's really about a habit, a lifestyle, and hopefully, as Philip was saying, this will change you. If you get into good eating habits, it's perhaps something that you can carry on even after you've stopped running. But this is very much about what you're doing when you're loading up for a big race or for training. So next slide. It's just a simple suggestion, really. I think Cocoa Pops are wonderful. I love Cocoa Pops. They're actually vegan, and when I found out, I went to the shop opposite my house, bought a packet and ate it in one day. I'm not suggesting you should do that. What I'm saying, Cocoa Pops are lovely for a cheat day, but they're probably not going to give you the requisite fuel for a 10-kilometer race or even for your training. The best thing to do is eat porridge, because it's a great carbohydrate. It's got fiber, it's got starch in it, and it releases sugar and releases energy slowly. And that's what you're doing in a 10K. You're not doing a short burst. Even if you are doing it in 40 minutes, 45 minutes, 50 minutes, that's still a long time. You're going to need a lot of energy. But the key thing as well is what you can eat after you've gone for a big run, or even after race day, because for all of us, our performance will improve if we recover quickly. And that's why having sort of your omega-3 fats are great. So obviously fish is fantastic for that. Soy is also good for those vegans out there. Maybe there's one of you. But again, your good carbohydrates afterwards as well, they help muscle recovery. And again, they continue to give you energy after you finish, because that's really a time when you need to be recovering well. So again, there's so much stuff online that you can find out in terms of finding a good diet plan. It's so essential if you want to push yourself that extra bit. Okay, next slide. Obviously, the body is absolutely essential too. Pushing yourself, you're going to need to, as Philip was saying, get stronger, increase your lung capacity and all that sort of stuff. So I've just got a couple of tips when it comes to the body. So if we go to the next slide. Look after yourself. I don't think we say it enough. Take a break. You're doing it really well now. That's all you have to do. Sit down, take a break, relax. Recovery is so important. Don't go out and run every day in the first week or two because it's not sustainable. You need to rest well. But on top of that, being mindful of how you recover with stretching is so important. And look, I'm going to admit to you as well, and this is why it makes me think, why am I doing this? Not only is my diet pretty poor, but also my sense of flexibility is little to none. I couldn't touch my toes if my life depended on it, honestly. I'm so inflexible. However, again, it's something that I'm trying to incorporate into my everyday. And if we go to the next slide, and again, it may be obvious to you, but these are some things that being flexible and doing your stretches are key to, and it's obvious why it's important for running performance. So increase flexibility. That's obviously helpful. You want to have a spring in your step when you're running. You want to improve your range of motion, because ultimately there will be times in your race, especially at the end, where you want to be more explosive. So having your increased range of motion is important. But also, probably most importantly, when you stretch, after you've built up lots of lactic acid in your muscles, you want to break that down. Because as I said, recovery is so important, especially towards the end of this sort of 10-week training cycle that we're going to be on. So, I don't know, maybe it seems obvious, but get stretching into your routine. So, I think I would rather take 5 minutes out of my running in order to get that stretching. I've actually started to engage in yoga, and I find that absolutely lovely. Something you could possibly think about doing too. Yoga with Adrian on YouTube. She's a lovely lady. Next slide. Mix it up. Here's the thing. I know I shouldn't be saying this on camera, but running is boring. I'm not going to lie to you. I don't find running particularly enthralling, exhilarating, especially over a long distance. And I think for those people I've met that do say that, I'm extremely I just don't really trust those sort of people, to be honest. I mean, it's fantastic. Don't get me wrong. I do love running, but excitement is probably not high up there. And for 10 weeks to be doing a lot of running, the last thing you want to do is get bored. So my suggestion is mix it up. And there's actually not only is it fun to mix things up, to be doing things like short and sharper exercises, going to the gym, you're cycling and all that sort of stuff. It actually has incredible benefits when it comes to long-term running too. So if we go to the next slide, as I mentioned, high intensity interval training. It's something that you can see on YouTube, but essentially it's doing more intense exercise in a shorter burst and having more rest. And you can do that anywhere. You can do that on a bike, you can do that swimming, you can do that in the gym, or you can do it with basic exercises where you are in your living room. But here's another interesting thing, and there have been studies to prove how effective it is when it comes to long distance running. So for instance, just a few years ago, a university in the UK did a study of 32 runners. Elite runners as well, so really high up there. And they put them into 4 different types of groups. One group just did their regular running training. 2 groups did some high intensity training, but with less rest. And 1 group did very high intensity training, along with their other running, but with more rest. And they found that whilst the other groups had little to no improvement in their running times and their performance over a few weeks, the group that did the high intensity interval training increased their performance by an average of about 3%. Now, I'm not great at maths, but I know that 3 is close to 5. And I was talking about 5% earlier. There you go, there's 3% won already. If you get that in your diet right, you're probably hitting 7, and then you're in dreamland. Although if it doesn't happen, we can't give you your money back. I'm just going to say that now. Mix it up, do something different. There's loads of great stuff again on YouTube. We're not asking you to do hours and hours of stuff. If you come along to the Love Running Club, which I'm sure will be mentioned momentarily, we'll do that sort of thing. We're not just going to run every week. We're going to mix it up. We're going to show you different exercises you can do that, which are fun as well. So that's a great way of mixing it up. Next slide. One more on the body, energy conservation. Again, unless you're seeking to do the 10K in sort of 27 minutes or so, you're going to want to be doing this in a non-explosive way. You're going to want to be conserving energy. It sounds silly to say that when you're expending energy, but it's a marathon, or a very short marathon in a sense, and not a race, as they say. It's a long distance. That's why they call it long distance running, and keeping your energy is absolutely key. So if we go to the next slide. Oh, sorry, that's the next one, but keep that there, that's fine. One thing you'll want to do is, I mean, it's funny, isn't it? You go to the park and you see people of all sorts of different running styles, but the most effective running style for a long distance run is to keep it as simple and as compact as possible. Runners and cyclists will use this word called cadence, which is effectively a sort of posh way of saying the number of steps that you have in a minute, or the number of actions that you have in a minute. You want to keep that as high as possible. Little short burst steps are better than sort of getting those knees up. You want to save that for your high intensity interval training. You want to keep those steps short. And people recommend between 160 and 180. Good way to measure it is over a 30-second period, just to count how many times your left foot hits the ground, double it, and then double it again, because that takes into account 2 feet over 60 seconds. Or whatever way you do it, when you go out, count and just think, are my feet hitting the floor a number of times, or do I need to try and improve that? Again, that's something we'll look at the Love Running Club. Finally, it's a little gift, a final sort of top tip from an average Joe runner like myself anyway, is this. We go to the next slide. Get an epic playlist. I know last time I was here I talked about it, and the person who came up afterwards sort of totally disagreed with me, but he's not here and he was wrong. So you may be running with someone and you may find that talking throughout the race is helpful. That's fine. I know my wife and I used to run together a lot, and she used to like talking, and it was sort of like, come on, like we talk enough at home. Let's just not do this. So that's cool. I'm not saying you absolutely have to do this. It may not make a huge amount of difference. But for me, running and music go hand in hand. I really can't do it without music. So have some fun. Go home, get onto Spotify or whatever thing you use, and put together a playlist. And my advice is come up with something which I've patterned, of course. It's called the vibe sandwich. So you want to start off the first sort of few minutes with it's really the best piece of advice is death metal. But if you're not into that, maybe some sort of grime music or something that's really going to get the juices flowing. Or even if you can get an old recording of your PE teacher shouting abuse at you, whatever it is that's going to get you sort of really motivated to get going. I need to get going. I need to do this. That's the first part of the sandwich. Obviously, we don't want to be thinking about bread too much because that's a bad carb. But middle, that's where the chilled stuff comes in. And that's the vast majority of the race, because you want to get into a rhythm. You want to get that cadence right. You want to not be thinking too much about what's going on. You want to just get into the zone. But I promise you, if you finish with 3 or 4 songs that are absolutely epic, I'm thinking Firework by Katy Perry, then it's going to make a huge difference, because you want to finish that race like a boss. I want to see every single one of you at the end of the race just absolutely smashing it, just taking that extra 5 or 7% or whatever it is and just blowing everyone else out of the water. That's what you want to do ultimately. Save that energy, having got your diet right, and just absolutely blowing it away. That's my advice. I hope some of it's helpful.